Welcome back to Children's Church. I'm so glad to have you here with me. Happy second week of Advent, and all this month we're talking about good news. Today it's good news for Joseph. So we're in the book of Matthew, chapter 1, verse 18 to about 25, and then we're going to talk about it. The birth of Jesus Christ came about this way. After his mother Mary had been engaged to Joseph, it was discovered before they came together that she was pregnant by the Holy Spirit. So her husband Joseph, being a righteous man and not wanting to disgrace her publicly, decided to divorce her secretly. But after he had considered these things, an angel of the Lord suddenly appeared to him in a dream, saying, "Joseph, son of David, don't be afraid to take Mary as your wife, because what has been conceived in her is by the Holy Spirit. She will give birth to a son, and you are to name him Jesus. He will save his people from their sins." Now all this took place to fulfill what was spoken by the Lord through the prophet. "See, the virgin will become pregnant and give birth to a son, and they will name him Emmanuel," which is translated, God is with us. When Joseph got up from sleeping, he did as the Lord's angel had commanded. He married Mary, but did not know her intimately until she gave birth to a son, and they named him Jesus. So here's the things we know about Joseph. It's kind of a short list. He and Mary were within a normal age range for them, and the way it worked is their families would have engaged them, and then they would have decided if they were good together, and they did. So we know that Mary and Joseph like each other and thought they'd be good at being married. We know that even though Joseph thought Mary cheated on him, he didn't want her to be publicly disgraced. He didn't yell, didn't scream, didn't do anything mean or cruel. He was just gonna take care of it quietly so that Mary could live her life, because in those times she could have been stoned for being pregnant without a husband. So we know he was a pretty good guy. He wanted to make sure Mary would be okay, even though he thought she did something bad to him. And we know that Joseph listened when God talked. Well, hang on. We also know Joseph was a professional carpenter and he was very good at what he did. But here's the important one. We know that Joseph listened when God talked. This was good news for Joseph because it also meant that the person he trusted he was right to have trusted her. Mary didn't do anything wrong, and I'm sure that was a big relief for Joseph, right until it set in that he was going to have to raise the Son of God. I feel like that's a little terrifying. That's a heavy burden to ask of a man. But we know that Joseph, it doesn't even say he took time to think about it. He got up from hearing God's message and did everything they commanded. How many people in the Bible can you think of got up and did what God said first try? Think about it for a second. Because let's think of all of our important people. For Moses, it took a burning bush, his brother Aaron, and an extra dream. Gideon tested God 3 times before he did what he was told. Barak the general wouldn't do what God said unless Deborah went with him. David didn't do what God said the first time and had to be corrected by Abigail. Like, the more you go through it, it's hard to find people who did what God said the first time. But Mary and Joseph are 2 of them. Even though there was fear, even though there was pressure, there was good news in who Jesus is and who he would be. So those are the things we know about Jesus' dad. He was all around a good man. He was a carpenter, and he didn't just follow what God said. He didn't test him, he didn't mull it over. He did what God said immediately. And that's why God chose him. God didn't just pick Mary for Jesus' mom. He picked Joseph to be Jesus' earthly father, and he chose him for a reason. He chose a good man who followed God first, who taught that to Jesus and the man he would later become. And I think that's a wonderful thing to think about over Christmas, is Jesus was shaped by the people God chose to be in his life. And we know what they were like because we know what Jesus was like. This is most of the information we get about Joseph. Hey, you're going to raise God's son, and later he has to flee his home country because he's raising God's son. Joseph went through some stuff. But we know who he was because we know who Jesus would be later. He wasn't just God's son. He was Joseph's son too. That's what I wanted to talk about today, is Joseph got good news, and he passed that good news on to the rest of us. Have a wonderful week. Have a wonderful day of Advent, and I will see you next week.